Today I am downtown Vancouver covering 10 things that you should know before moving to Canada. Will you freeze to death? Where are all the igloos? Can people actually afford to live here? Well, I'll answer those questions and more in this video. And stick around to the end where McCullough, my good friend and Vancouver creator, will share some of his honorable mentions. Starting with number 1, what is a credit score in Canada? Why is it so important? And how do you actually get a good one?
It is true that a good credit score versus a bad credit score here in Canada could make the difference on if you're able to buy a property or not. It can also stop you from buying a car or just getting any type of loan. And a bad score can lead to you paying more for something than you would otherwise if you had a good score. Credit scores are something every single person has in Canada, and yours is determined by how trustworthy you are with money. Do you pay your bills and do you pay them on time? And everyone's credit starts right here in the middle. So you don't start at ground one, you start right in the middle, and if you pay your stuff on time, it goes up or it goes down if you don't. The simplest and easiest way to build good credit is by getting a credit card and paying it off on time every single month. If you don't owe any money at the end of the month, your credit score goes up, and if you do owe money and you didn't make any payment, not even the minimum payment, then it goes down. So although I do recommend everyone getting a credit card, you have to be someone who can manage your money because it can be dangerous otherwise. If you want to learn more about the credit card system here in Canada, I will link a video below that I have watched which explains it pretty well, so I don't waste your time too much.
Number 2, tipping in Canada. Is it expected? How much do you tip and when are you supposed to tip?
Tipping in Canada is expected and most people do it, but it depends what kind of service you're spending money on. If you don't tip, it's kind of seen as a little bit disrespectful and that you just really didn't enjoy your time whatever you just did, you didn't enjoy. Some common times to tip are at restaurants for your waiter or waitress, taxi drivers, barbers, things like tattoo artists. I tipped my tattoo artist because it was service-based. But I didn't tip the painters who painted my apartment, which is also service-based, but that's not something you usually tip for. The best thing you can do is ask friends or people you know who live here and ask if, would you tip for this thing? You know, that's kind of how you figure it out. The usual tip here is 15%, but just so you know, when you do tip someone, usually it goes to the company as a whole, and then it gets split up between all the employees. So when you tip someone, just know it's not all directly going to them. And if you want, you can even tip me by liking this video. Yes, I just asked you for a tip.
Number 3 is the Canadian languages. And no, we do not speak Canadian. Here's everything you need to know to communicate here.
So it's actually pretty simple compared to some other countries because we only have two official languages here, English and French. And only a couple places where French is primarily the main spoken language, like Quebec. If I say Quebec, they won't like that, so I gotta say Quebec. Although most people who grew up in Canada somewhere probably took some type of French lessons, a lot of people do not continue their education after high school. So only 20% of Canadians actually speak French. I recently started learning French again because I wanted to have more than one language in my skill set. So I started learning online through Lingoda, the sponsor of the video, and the reason I started using them was because they have this thing called a sprint challenge. You sign up and you do a class every single day for 2 months and get cash back for it if you attend all the classes. If you can't commit to that, they also have one where you can sign up for just half the amount, so 15 classes per month, and you can still get cash back. Not gonna lie, I thought that was a pretty cool idea because if you've learned another language, consistency is probably like the most important part. I'm at 18 days right now of French straight, and I am more, I wouldn't say fluent, but I know it better than I have at any other point in my life. And I used to go to school for it. They also give us $25 off their sign-up fees with the link below and the code ADAMBELL. They currently offer English, French, German, and Spanish, and they also offer business English, which, if you're a businessman or businesswoman, that could help you. Each class you're in has a maximum of 5 people, so it's an environment where you can actually speak to your classmates and ask the teacher questions like you're actually there. It's interactive, not just like a page with words to memorize and learn. I'm also visiting France for the first time soon, and there's just something about speaking another language and actually having a small conversation for the first time, even if it's as simple as ordering a croissant. See, that's why I'm taking these lessons, because I still need some work. So if you are traveling to Canada or moving here full time, this could be a great way to brush up on your skills, have some real conversations, get comfortable with the language before you actually get here. I'll leave all of Lingoda's links below, and let's move on to the next point.
Number 4 is the cost of living in Canada. And I'm not just gonna tell you it's expensive because in places like Vancouver or Toronto, it may be, but there's other places where you can get a lot for your money.
Most people have this perception of Canada that it is expensive, and some places really are, but there's also a lot of places where, the average earning per year can buy you everything you need and more, everything else. Well, not everything, but most things that you would want, like discretionary income. But in other places like Vancouver and Toronto, the cost of living is so high that a lot of people, well, they actually don't have any discretionary income, and sometimes they can't even cover all their bills. Minimum wage here in British Columbia, where Vancouver is $15.65, which earns you $2,509 a month, full time. And the average one-bedroom apartment in Vancouver here rents for $2,500 a month. So if you work minimum wage here in Vancouver, you can afford an apartment, but that's it. You have $9 left over. And yes, those numbers are real. I've been there. That was my first job here. It was a rough first year. That's what I'll say. Which is why some of these expensive cities have like a housing crisis, because multiple people are living in like one bedroom sometimes. If you're curious about Vancouver expenses, how much it costs per month, I'll link a video up here that goes over exactly that. In Alberta, the province to the east of British Columbia, the wages are actually higher, the average wage, and the living expenses are lower on average. So the people there have a higher discretionary income. Main reason for that is because BC, we have mountains here. We're right on the ocean. It's a very desirable place to live. So that kind of makes sense. The more people want to live somewhere, the higher the price goes, supply and demand. So before you move to the country, research the areas, research the cost of living, the average salaries, know what you're getting yourself into.
So this is a serious one. It's homelessness and mental illnesses here in Canada.
So this point is not something cool or interesting to share. It's just something that people may not always want to know, but they should know. Most larger cities in Canada have an area that's not as nice as the other areas. Here in Vancouver, that area is the downtown Eastside. In these areas, people are living on the street, they suffer from drug addiction, mental illness, and that leads to areas being less desirable. There may be, more garbage on the street, more crime per area. The real issue there is not the garbage on the ground and stuff, it's the people who, they need the help. If you were interested in moving to Vancouver, I'll link a video below that talks about the downtown Eastside. I just don't feel comfortable recording people on the street there and putting it in a video. And another reason this is a point within this video is because, sometimes you may be looking at an apartment somewhere and applying for it, but it really looks like a good deal. So this is something to keep in mind before you move to a neighborhood you've never been to. So do research on a neighborhood before you, secure and sign something to live somewhere for a year or whatever amount of time it is. Make sure you do your research, know where you're moving to.
Number 6 plus 1 is, how do you actually move to Canada? Like, what kind of options do you have and what does the process look like?
There are a number of ways to move to Canada, but by far the two most popular are a study permit and a work permit. And it can really help you get that permit if you went to school for some type of thing and you have that education, or if you've worked in that field in Canada in the past. That one helps a lot. If not, having some education really helps their decision if they're gonna give you a work permit or not as well. If you do have previous skills, you can apply for express entry, which is for the people who can contribute to the Canadian economy right away. I'll tell you where you can apply for that in just a second. Secondly is the study permit. And the reason this one's so popular is because if they don't have what we just spoke about, a previous education or previous work experience, many people apply for schools here and they decide that they're just gonna learn it here in Canada while they can already start living here. And then the hope is to get a job offer when they graduate, so then they're allowed to stay. Because after you graduate, you're only allowed to stay for so long without a job. And finally is the list of other ways that you can be allowed to move or come into Canada. As you can see on screen, there are more options, but some of them are definitely more specific, like you can move here, but you have to work in a certain industry, or you can move here, but you can only choose between these two provinces. All the ways I just spoke about, I will link below this video so you can use them as a resource. Last note I'll mention on this is if you want to live in Canada permanently, you can apply for PR or permanent residency, and you have to have lived and worked here for 3 of the past 5 years, and then you can apply. And then you can stay forever if you want.
Number 7 is Canada's free healthcare, which isn't technically free. I'll say free in quotes because we do pay for it by way of taxes. And if you didn't know, Canada does have high taxes.
For example, if you get a job that's going to pay you $100,000 a year, that's a pretty good amount of money. Well, you're actually going to go home with $72,000 a year after income tax. And on top of that, anytime we buy anything, usually there is another tax or 2 that we pay on every item. And with all those taxes we pay, it allows the government to give free basic healthcare, like doctor appointments or checkups, just the basic things, having like a doctor help you, answer your questions, look at you, that kind of thing. If they prescribe you something like, oh, you need this medicine, that's when you need to pay for it. So the free part only goes so far. In a lot of cases, good companies who want to help their employees and care about their employees will have a benefits package, which if you get a job here in Canada, you should ask if it comes with benefits or ask about the benefits, because that can be things like they put $1,000 $1,000 a year towards your eye care, or a few thousand toward your dental care, because those are other things that aren't free.
Number 8 is all about housing in Canada, and more specifically, buying a home or buying property, which I know very well because I am a licensed real estate agent here in British Columbia.
Since I am constantly up to date with everything in the housing market here in British Columbia, and really specifically Vancouver and the areas around it, I know that recently on January 1st, 2023, there's been a foreign buyer's ban. What does that mean? Well, that means for the next 2 years, no foreigners are allowed to buy in Canada almost anywhere. So if you were planning on buying here in Canada within the next 2 years, it's kinda almost not gonna happen. There are some exceptions, like certain areas, like little pockets near or around Vancouver, and also other areas in the country where it's still allowed, but most of those exceptions are for places or cities that are less than 10,000 people. And some people actually will be exempt, like people who were just about to get PR and they found the perfect house they want to buy. The government may let it go. So if you're someone who is just about to buy and you're wondering if you still can, you can send me an email below at my email here and ask, and we can figure it out.
Number 9 is all about danger in Canada. How dangerous is it? Do you feel comfortable walking around by yourself? What about at night? This is actually the most common question that I get on Instagram.
Canada is a pretty safe place. Am I saying that no crimes happen? No, that is not the case. They do happen, but a lot of the time they're linked to maybe a case where someone is mentally ill. And that especially goes for the random attacks or assaults, things like those. Crime like assaults or robberies don't just like happen in broad daylight. They don't. In Vancouver specifically, I've been here for 6 years. I've never witnessed like an actual crime where something happens to someone and then it was on purpose or things like that. 6 years and I haven't experienced it. And I've lived in Canada for my whole life, so 23 years, that's how old I am, right? And I've never experienced anything like that. I just hear about it, see it on the news, so it's not common. To summarize the point, I never feel unsafe. I feel fine walking downtown at night alone, but maybe that is just me, and maybe that's a little bit of, male privilege talking. In a lot of cases, it's less likely that a guy would get attacked than a girl. So if I ask my girlfriend if she feels comfortable walking alone at night downtown in the city, she would probably say not really. Chances are still low anything happens, but again, things do happen. And remember how we mentioned the larger cities usually have an area that's not so nice? Those are the areas you don't really want to be around at night by yourself. Again, I still feel safe in those areas, so that gives you an idea of how bad or how unsafe they are. I never feel unsafe, but still in those areas, I'll have one earbud in, not both. So just common sense of being cautious.
Number 10 is something that everybody puts a little bit of research into, whether they're just traveling here, spending a little bit of time, or they're moving here. And that is, what's the weather like?
The main thing you need to know is that Canada is huge. And so there'll be some parts of the country that are negative 40 degrees Celsius, and on the other side, it'll be 5 degrees or 10 degrees the same time of year. That's why I live in Vancouver. It's one of the warmest areas in the country. So before you move or take your trip anywhere in Canada, make sure you research the average temperatures for that time of year. BC is the most neutral province. Another reason that people like to live here, like me, because it might get to like negative 10, and in the summer, maybe 40 degrees, but that's pretty rare because some places you don't even want to go outside because the tears on your face are so cold that they freeze to your face, and you're crying because it's so cold in the first place. So it's just this cycle. You pretty much don't want to go outside. That's what I'm saying. So do your research before you leave. And now a few honorable mentions from a very well-known Canadian creator, JJ McCullough. What do you have for us, JJ?
Hello friends, my name is JJ, and I've spent a lot of time talking about Canadian issues over the years in the media and on YouTube. And here are some of my honorable mentions for things about Canada that newcomers should know. So studies routinely show that immigrants to Canada make, on average, less than native-born Canadians. And one big reason for this is that immigrants to Canada often find themselves working in lower tier level jobs, even if they achieved a high degree of education in their old country. And this is because a lot of good jobs in Canada, like being a doctor or lawyer or teacher or engineer, require being licensed by some sort of professional organization before you can legally work. And these organizations may only grant a work license to someone who has completed what is, in many cases, a very long and expensive training program in Canada. There is an old cliche in Canada about a taxi driver with a PhD, which is a bit of an exaggeration, but only a bit. Honorable mention number 2. Something else that I notice immigrants sometimes have a bit of a challenge with is this question, of whether Canada is different from the United States or not. What I would say is this: Canada and the US are very, very similar. There are important differences between the two when it comes to things like law or politics, but when it comes to things like what day-to-day life is like, or what kind of foods people eat, or what kind of jobs people have, or how the cities are laid out, or how people think about things like gender roles or family life, in those kind of realms, Canada and the US are very, very, very similar. Lastly, I would just say to remember that Canada is a very, very big country. I don't want to be condescending about this, but newcomers can sometimes be a little bit naive when it comes to grasping just how large this country is. You'll hear stories about immigrants who move to Vancouver and they have some family living in Montreal and they think that they'll be able to visit them all the time because, you know, we're both in Canada. But in reality, traveling from Western Canada to Eastern Canada can require spending many, many hours in the airplane and possibly thousands of dollars on travel costs. Back to you, Adam.
Thank you, JJ. I will link your info below this video. My final words for the video are, if you're moving here, I do have a free resume and template guide that you can download just to see what a Canadian resume and cover letter would look like if you're gonna apply for jobs here, so that's below. And remember, you can learn another language with Lingoda, the sponsor, and possibly get all your cash back for the lessons. I'll link that below as well. With that said, I will see you next week. Leave all your questions below, and that's it.